And we're live. So welcome to tonight's meeting of the Policy and Performance Scrutiny Panel, which is being broadcast and recorded via Microsoft Teams Live. My name is Councillor Richard Goma. I'm the chair of this committee and I'll be conducting the meeting tonight. During the meeting, you'll hear from members of the committee who are on your screen now, and also present are the officers from Eastleigh Borough Council who are now shown on the screen. They will present their reports that have been written and provide support to the committee tonight. If we experience a connection problem, which is likely because OpenReach killed my broadband this morning, this event will be paused. And if a councillor loses connection or joins later, I'll ask them to introduce or reintroduce themselves if need be. The Vice Chair tonight, which is usually Malcolm Cross, has sent his apologies for the meeting, so Councillor Tyson Payne has kindly volunteered to take his place. So in the unlikely event of myself losing connection, the acting Vice Chair, Councillor Sarah Tyson Payne, will take over. We are, of course, very reliant on technology these days, so please bear with us. So the first item on our agenda would usually be public participation, but no members of the public have asked to participate, so we've had none of that tonight, which brings us swiftly to item 2, which is the minutes from the last meeting, which is the 20th of July 2020. Do I have any comments or questions on the minutes?
Yes, Chair. I don't recall leaving the meeting, but if the minutes say I do, I must have done, so I will abstain when we vote on the minutes. Thank you.
I recall you may have had a temporary connection problem rather than deliberately leaving us.
Okay, fair enough. That makes a bit more sense. So whether I left and came back, I would think that's more likely than I left the meeting.
Apologies for interrupting. I think this was a meeting, Sarah, you had a really bad headache and you had to leave because you couldn't continue. You were really suffering with your head.
Thank you. Thank you. I now remember. Thank you.
Super. Okay, any more comments or questions on those minutes? Otherwise, could I have a proposer?
Councillor Groves proposes.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Councillor second.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Jedd to second in chat, and we'll now do the vote in this brave new world of the poll in the chat. So you just click the one you want, I think.
Yeah, you'll see it's in the chat, so if you just click the one that you'd like to use.
Just remind everyone to press submit, because I forgot.
Yes, you do need to press submit vote or it doesn't work.
And you'll tell us when everyone's voted. Laura.
It's got to 100%, so it probably is.
Ten responses.
Yeah, everybody's voted.
Thank you. So that is clearly carried. Next we go on to our apologies for this evening. I have apologies from Councillor Cross. Do we have apologies from anyone else?
Not that we know of, Chair.
Okay, so Councillors Dogood and Pragnell are absent tonight.
Chair,
yes.
I saw Councillor Jefte appear on the screen a moment ago.
We've got Jeff, yes, but we don't have James.
Okay, sorry.
Good. So declarations of interest. So do members have any declarations of interest that they wish to make? If so, please could you indicate in the chat, and when called, wait for the red box before stating the nature and reason for the interest. Doesn't look like it. Okay, I will then go on to my chair's report. So welcome back after the summer break. I won't ask if you got the chance to go anywhere. And I hope everyone had a nice break from meetings, if nothing else. So there are a few items that we were hoping to pick up. Highways England, of course, we have invited to discuss. I'm afraid we still haven't had a response from them. We'll keep trying. And then the big item for me at the moment for consideration is the work plan. As you know, we've been a little bit agile for two reasons. First is the disruption we had from COVID. Obviously, that is now not over, but we have a little bit more predictability than we did. The second was, of course, that we were waiting for more of a plan for the policies that were due for renewal. I'm pleased to say that Dickon has now drawn up with his team a big list of the policies that are due for renewal and some timetables for getting them done. So what I'm going to do before the next meeting is sit down with him and we'll work out what we want our work plan to look like. And Councillor Dogood says he is here, but he can't get voice working. So we can note that in the minutes. That's all I have from a chair's report, but of course we've got various task and finish groups running, which fits in with our action plan to do a little more sort of in-depth scrutiny in smaller informal groups. So I'm going to ask, and this is item 6 on our agenda, for some of the members of those current task and finish groups to give us a brief update of what's been going on there. So I'd like to start with the housing policy group, and Councillor Nick Couldry has offered to give us an update there. Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the housing policy, the housing task and finish group, which comprises Councillor Gomer, myself, Councillor Groves and Councillor Jerd, has met a couple of times. We had obviously a bit of a hiatus initially because of the COVID crisis, but we managed to meet early in July for a preliminary discussion about how we were going to carry out our task. The task is obviously in the reference, in the terms of reference, or in the minutes of the 12th of March. We started with a discussion about planning policy. We've had Andy Smith, who's the head of finance and the deputy CFO, conduct us through these various aspects. We had an initial discussion about planning policy. It was clear that this was a little bit more complex. We had discussion but no decisions about it. We discovered that we had very little information on empty homes, so we're going to have to start from scratch on that. And the governance arrangement for the council's own efforts in developing housing were discussed and put as the first meeting proper, which we went through. So we went through the way that the council had set up its housing projects and the reasons why they'd set them up that way and how they had evolved. Now I can't give you a precise details of all of them now, but what is clear is that it started off as a Aspect Building Communities Limited was set up as a joint venture with two housing associations and another council, and as an umbrella organisation that was used to conduct various projects in partnership with one or other of those members. Each housing project had its own governance arrangement, and it was really structured by the need to provide capital to tax and other illegal implications. And this has evolved since the start, and now the council is becoming much more involved. For instance, the project in Pembers Hill is a limited liability partnership just between the council and the builder Drew Smith, and the one Horton Heath project is being developed by the council itself. But we didn't get to the bottom of how all these things were done and why. Frankly, it was, though we didn't discuss it, it was pretty obvious that it had been well thought through and that there was no worry about the proposals. We next move on. I think we have another meeting scheduled, which will later this month, and we'll take the next step in these investigations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Any questions on that task and finish from anybody? Doesn't look like it. In that case, could I ask Councillor Tyson-Payne, would you give us a quick update on the COVID recovery working group?
Yes. Waiting for the red box.
There we go. There we go.
Thank you. Yes, this was an interesting and lively update from the officers. They've clearly got a very structured way of working, and to be fair, they seem to have covered everything that we expected when we challenged them. There were a couple of exceptions. The first thing that we really noted was that they were calling this recovery post-COVID, and we're very clear we're not post-COVID, it's living with COVID. So I think possibly when this was set up, the idea was, you know, this will all be over by Christmas. Clearly that's not the case, and we are as a nation, or actually as a world, having to live with COVID for a good couple of years. So that was the first item of debate. They've got a number of different work streams, and I'll be perfectly honest, I couldn't write fast enough to get them all noted. The main concern from us was the unknown unknowns. We felt that the thing that was missing from the recovery work was a digital work stream. So enabling our residents who are not connected digitally to be able to be connected to the council and the rest of the world. So that was a work stream that we felt should be put in place, but more across all of the other work streams rather than a silo on its own. There was also quite a long debate about the fact that actually the non-connected digital people are not necessarily the elderly. There are quite a lot of younger people who don't have the skills, but also there's a large number of people who don't have the technology and therefore probably don't have the skills. So there was a recommendation from us that they looked at a work stream for digital inclusion. It was very good. The only person who didn't speak was Melvin Hartley, who's looking at lessons learnt and remembrance, and we anticipate an update from him at the next meeting. The request from the group was, now this is quite tricky, that would councillors consider what they would expect to be covered by the recovery work? Now that's pretty much a difficult thing to ask if you don't know what's already being covered. And the reality is we felt everything was being covered. So my thoughts are that if people have a particular thing that they think, oh, I wonder if they thought about X, if they could inform me and I can pass that on to the recovery group. You may well suggest things that are already covered, in which case that's a result, and if anybody mentions something that's not already covered, I can pass that on to the group and talk about how we can include that. Chair, does that meet your need for the update?
That's lovely, thank you. I'm pleased to see this being given lots of thought, and including IT as a cross-cutting concern sounds really good. Councillor Grajewski, I think you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, as far as recovery is concerned, of course, in the two-tier system that we have the Borough Council doing its thing and also the County Council doing its thing. For instance, I sit on a subcommittee of Cabinet on economic recovery, and I think, you know, to a greater or lesser extent, the two tiers are working together. So there'll be things that are being done by county that rather than the borough, and vice versa, depending on what works best. But my question was going to be, because whilst it's interesting to hear Councillor Tyson Payne's report, she said she couldn't write fast enough. And I'm not suggesting we send her on a shorthand course, but do we not have a democratic services support to take minutes at those meetings? Because, you know, it's difficult to remember from one meeting to the next, I find. So, you know, is that not support not there?
So I do not recall somebody from Democratic Services being there. I'm not going to say they weren't, but no minutes have come out yet. So this meeting was 2 days ago, on Tuesday. So I can look into that and get back to you, and see if there are some minutes going to be produced.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Chairman. But I think that you know, even if it's we obviously don't want to see the minutes of everything, but going from one meeting to next with the task and finish group, I think it would be useful to have proper minutes. Thank you.
I concur in spirit. The answer is that no, we don't always have democratic services. There is always an officer who should be taking notes and sharing resources. Certainly it shouldn't be a case that we have to have members writing everything down. Things that are already written down in any kind of report should be circulated, and then the key points do need to be noted either by a nominated member or an officer, and we do need to make sure that that is happening, and I will take that away as chair to see how we can improve on that.
Thank you.
Councillor Tidridge, I think you wanted to speak as well.
Yeah, just really to picking up on something that Judith said, which was really important about it being a two-tier system. It's actually a three-tier system. One of the things I was pleased to see was that liaison with the parish councils and seeing how the parish councils are coping with everything was very much on the agenda of officers. Really reiterating what Sarah said about post-COVID was a term we objected to, because obviously we're with it for a long time. One of the things we were encouraging officers to do was to avoid taking a siloed approach, particularly to the external impact of COVID. There seemed to be almost a struggle to think of an initiative to fit with the category, whereas what we need to be thinking perhaps is initiatives like the digital inclusion one, which could actually cover a number of different objectives, rather than just trying to think, okay, health and wellbeing, what are we doing here? If we can think if there are initiatives that the borough council that can spread across a number of the different areas, then so much the better.
Absolutely, thank you. Certainly, yeah, that notion of getting those cross-cutting concerns through, and we had a few in our own action plan around digital inclusion, sustainable prosperity and future population growth and service delivery. Making sure we find a way to bring those cross-cutting things in will be important, and I hope once I've had this meeting with Dickon to work out what the sort of policy review processes for the year, we'll be able to work out how we can timetable some of those things as well. But it's great that some of those task and finish groups have started thinking about it. Were there any more questions or comments on the COVID recovery working group? If not, we'll go on to our third task and finish group, which is in flight at the moment, which is social policy, and Councillor Jerd has offered to give us an update on that.
Hello, thank you, Chair. So the Social Task and Finish group met on the 17th of August with Councillor Campbell as the portfolio holder, and the officer was Ross McLean. They gave us a really good presentation highlighting the areas that's covered by the social policy, the current priorities, how that fitted in with the corporate action plan, the health and wellbeing services plan, and the current performance KPIs. We then had a short discussion around what objectives we had as a task and finish group, and how we could work together to kind of shape that policy going forward. However, it was quite a low attendance that evening for a variety of reasons. So it was agreed that they would send out all the slides and some background information that I requested to back up some of the questions that we'd asked during that presentation. and that was going to be distributed to the Task and Finish group for us to come up with questions and have a think about what we wanted as a Task and Finish group to get out of those meetings, and arrange another meeting with hopefully some more people at a later date. So I think all the members of the Task and Finish group have been sent all of the slides and the relevant background information on that now.
Great, thank you very much. Were there any questions on the social policy Task and Finish? It doesn't look like it, in which case we'll move on to item. Oh no, we should just, I think my script says we should just agree to note those updates. So I propose that we note the updates. Can someone second it for me?
I'm happy to.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson Payne, I think that was. And if everyone could just unmute and signal your agreement. Oh, Councillor Atkinson, you'd like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I found those reports really interesting. As a member who doesn't serve on this committee or any of those particular task and work events, I just wondered if there's any way that those reports could be shared with members, as they were really interesting and helpful to members to understand the working of the committees. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad they were useful. This is something we've been working up to for the last year or so, in doing sort of more detailed policy scrutiny work. So the answer is that each of those Task and Finish groups will eventually put a report together, and sort of an overview of the meetings, the discussions that were had, and any recommendations that come out of it, which will then come to formal committee and will be published that way. So eventually those discussions will become public. It may be that we can work towards getting more sort of interim updates to share around, and I will also think about how we can do that. And actually, I would say that these Task and Finish groups don't have to be composed just of members of Policy and Performance. If anyone else from other committees would like to sit in or join in, that's very welcome. So let's make that invite official.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. OK, so yes, if you could just, we've had a proposer and a seconder that we note those. Could we just have everyone to unmute and signal agreement that we've noted those updates?
Yes, I'm
Agreed.
happy.
Agreed.
Yes, agreed.
Super, thank you everybody. Which brings us on to item 7, which is an update on the Constitution review. So I'm going to ask our Chief Executive, Nick Tustian, to introduce item 7, and then we'll open it up to questions after that. Nick, could you talk us through the Constitution review?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me along to this scrutiny panel to discuss what is actually a very important piece of work. You don't need me to tell you, members, I'm sure, how much the Constitution is important to the running of the council, and I'm sure it's avid reading for all of you every night just to check that we're running smoothly. In fact, I think the project initiation document that I circulated prior to this meeting, I think, has the words in it that says that it's been said that the prime objective of a good local authority is to have an accessible and modern constitution. I might argue that a local authority has slightly more important things to do than worry about a constitution, but I think it does state how important it is to ensure that our governance is correct. And I think we have to say that the constitution we're currently working on was written back in about the year 2000 when we introduced the new system of operating. And although it's been incrementally updated in bits and pieces throughout, it's never really had a fundamental overhaul. And I think that time is right now. I think the best thing I can say is that I hope the project initiation document sets out effectively what we're trying to achieve. But I think it's probably best if I break it down into 5 areas. There are within it certain codes of practice, and the 2 big key codes of practice are the contract standing orders. Now, the contract standing orders are under review, and the scrutiny for contract standing orders will be undertaken by the Procurement Executive Group. So the PEG, as it's known, will be receiving a revised constitution, and any changes to contract standing orders, whether it be around threshold for contract limits, building in things in and around European requirements, which of course may change with Brexit. We're not quite sure how contract arrangements will alter. Things like ODU and Brexit and state aid may be things of the past at some point. But the contract standing orders are very much owned by the Procurement Executive Group, and they will undertake a full scrutiny of that, and any change to that will need to be approved by them before they come forward for approval by other members. The financial regulations, the Chief Financial Officer, Sarah King, feels that they are virtually fit for purpose, and there will be very minor changes proposed in and around financial regs. It may be in and around certain limits that she might put in. We're not anticipating major alterations to financial regulations. Another major aspect of the Constitution, which I have to say has caused us problems in the past, is the scheme of delegation. And this is where we delegate to authorities through various acts of parliament and various codes of practice authority to undertake certain actions. And keeping this updated and keeping this refreshed has become a really difficult task, particularly in a very flat structure that we're operating at the moment. So we are we're doing a fundamental review of how our scheme of delegation works to make sure that officers are empowered correctly through the appropriate acts of parliament, through the appropriate authorities which they need in order to undertake their day-to-day activities. So huge piece of work. We've got somebody working almost full time, just working their way through this scheme of delegation to make sure it is correct. It is crucial. It's very important that we get that right. Perhaps I think perhaps real day-to-day interest for members will be what I would call almost the scheme of governance. And this is the sort of process in which we receive reports, in which we debate things, and to which meetings are conducted. And I think I have to be honest with you. If you've ever seen me at council or others, you often see us flicking backwards and forwards through the Constitution to try and find the appropriate paragraphs that govern the rules that we need to use, particularly when we get into things like amendments and different voting structures. It becomes incredibly complicated. And I have to say, I think our current Constitution is unnecessarily complicated. I have seen some. Even in the sort of the research that I've done in looking at changes to that, some much simpler forms of the Constitution, certainly written in English, which I think will be a big help. Certainly, I think in terms of more modern language, certainly in terms I would say is gender neutral, the things sort of which it needs refreshing. So I'm hoping to do have a fairly fundamental overhaul of that element of the Constitution, to make it actually much simpler for you. I'm hoping it'll be a much more readable document. It'll be written in a language I hope that you'll think is less legalese, much easier in terms of process, that I hope will assist you in your role as councillors. The other bit, although it does refer to it in there, is the role and responsibilities of committees and things such as cabinet and the scrutiny panels. I think the project mediation document perhaps overstates what we're intending to do here. Our initial aim is just simply to tidy up any wording in that, because the roles, any change to roles and committees is something that has to be progressed through yourselves, through councillors, a period of consultation, and we wouldn't normally introduce any changes to roles or committees partway through a municipal year. You've all got work plans, that's all been scheduled, so we'd be looking for any changes or any tidying up of roles or committees to perhaps be implemented in the AGM in May of next year. So there will be maybe some tidying up of wording, but at this point I don't see this project instigating a fundamental review of roles and responsibilities of committees. That is something which very much will be member led and will be guided by you as that process develops. The aim is to try and have a draft constitution by the end of this month, which is a tall order in itself, but the aim is to try and take the formal constitution through to approval at full council by November full council. Now I know that previously members have become incredibly frustrated in that they've been given this massive great document called the Constitution and said, here you are, read this and approve it, without track changes, without understanding what the changes are. What I hope to do is be able to give you a really nice lead into that by giving you a document that is readable, clearly identifies the changes, so you can properly assess the implications of the changes in the Constitution. As I say, the main aim is to simplify and bring it up to date from a document that was written some 20 years ago into a language that's perhaps more suitable for the current day. I'm hoping the PID is clear, the project initiation document is clear, but I'm clearly happy to answer any questions that any might have on either the process or any issues within it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I think the headlines there are tidier, simpler and more useful, which all sound good to me. So I'll go open this up for questions. So if you have questions, please mention it in chat. I've got a few people queued up. So could I go to Councillor Tyson Payne first, please?
Okay, so I have a number of questions, some of which have been Okay, so I have a number of questions, some of which have been answered, but actually makes me wonder if the project definition is as clear as it should be, because on reading the project definition, paragraph 2.1, I didn't pick up that this was just a tidy up in the way you have just described it, which I think is much needed. But the project definition led me to think there were a lot more things going on that had been missed. So my first question was, how certain are we that 2 committees is the right structure? And Nick, you have kind of answered that, because that's outside of the brief, but that's not clear in the project definition. How much are councillors being involved in this tidy up? Well, now I've heard that it's just more of a tidy up than a rewrite of the constitution. I'm kind of okay with that. The benefits statement is extremely weak. I would expect to see in the benefit statement things like there are no cashable benefits, but there are intangibles, which would include quality of information, a decision lens, efficiency, usability, and increased transparency as a result of this. So I really think the benefits needs really lifting. I don't think you could measure the benefits the way they're written at the moment. So on page 17, there's a hyperlink to the strategic priorities. That didn't work for me. It may be that I've had a ModGov issue, which has been resolved since I tested this. So I'm happy for other members to say, no, that works. So back to the members' involvement from the way the document reads, and this is probably what is intended but is not clear from the definition, is that members are only involved at the initiation and sign off. It feels as if we should be more involved elsewhere. The document mentions a couple of times aspirational elements, but doesn't say what the aspirational elements are. So this goes to the benefits. How can you know what you've not achieved if you haven't said what it is that you might put into tranche 2? I think the pig needs tidying up and tightening up, is my view. I'm sorry, Nick, I've whittled on. I'll leave you to tell me what you think.
Chair, do you want me to answer the questions in order, or do you want me to wait for you till you've heard from every speaker?
No, let's do them in order, because there was quite a lot there to engage with, wasn't there? Thank you, Sarah.
I don't want to understate that. I think maybe tidy up is a little bit of an understatement of what they are. I think it is much more than that, than simply just the tidying up. It is very. I did state right at the outset the importance of the Constitution. I think the work in and around the contract standing orders is absolutely crucial. Now it's embodied within this work as a sub-bit. I was trying to take it out of maybe the purview of this particular a scrutiny panel by emphasising that will go through a member panel in its own right. But that is a huge piece of work in looking at the contract standing orders. Financial regulations, as I said, is a very minor change, and that will be relatively minor. I think actually looking at the way in which we understand the debate, and perhaps I should have added into this, it will also give us a basis, I hope, for greater training. And maybe one of the benefits that we haven't stated in there is actually helping you as members understand work within the Constitution. We've often talked about a member training programme that's not just simply around briefing you on all the sort of professional issues that are there, but really helping you in your role as members in debating, chairing meetings. So I think there's the benefit there. I suspect we won't actually really know the benefits until we actually see the Constitution in operation, until we see how effectively it is to be working. And I suppose we've not really overstated the benefits. I think the benefits for us is actually it'll be a simpler, easier document to use, much more effective in terms of operating it. It'll make meetings, we hope, more streamlined and easily to understand. So we could articulate that. I suppose we felt that this was more of a lot of it was simply an admin task in needing it in terms of tightening up with some teeth in it around some of the key issues around things like contract standing orders. I'm sorry the hyperlink didn't work in and around strategic priorities. I've no idea why that didn't happen. Certainly it's a link that was in the document to help members and I'll explore that. But we can tighten up on the PID if it's not clear. I think there are already a few suggestions that maybe we should just clarify a few issues and maybe a bit clearer about what we're trying to achieve and also the benefits that come from it.
Excellent,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, I've got a request to speak from Councillor Atkinson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I can't wait till the contract standing orders comes to PEG. I'm sure we're going to have a really exciting time doing that. But what I wanted to ask was just a couple of minor points. During COVID, there's been a lot of home working, and it is possible that home working is going to continue in council even after COVID, because there are some benefits. Clearly, the whole thing needs review, but I couldn't see anything in this constitution review relating to home working, and I wondered whether it should be specifically included, because it's a completely different way of working, and the controls around that, particularly internal controls, processes and the use of them, have got to be different from those that are usual when one's working in the office. Therefore, I did wonder whether home working, a whole section on that, should be included. And the other thing I couldn't see as in the project document is anything relating to televising meetings, which was, I think, briefly mentioned at the last live or what's the word I want? When we weren't doing Teams, when we were all actually sitting around a table, I think it was mentioned there that televising council meetings was going to be investigated, and the constitution would need to be changed to include that. So I wondered if that was going to be taken into account. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Atkinson, some very good points there. Actually, the home working bit's really good, because I hadn't thought of a specific sort of area on home working, but that's certainly we can look at. We have a in terms of the recovery plan that we've got a whole team of people looking at, you know, how home working actually will work, how we can weave that into the normal operations that happen within the office. So I think actually, yeah, clarifying what that means in terms of the constitution, it's a really good idea. And it was remiss of me, I should have said as part of my introduction on this, part of the looking at the governance process and meetings will be about how we run virtual meetings. It will be about the virtual meeting process, how we can run that, because, you know, we'd like to think that even beyond this current crisis, we'll still be able to use the benefits of virtual meetings to use our time much more effectively. So it will include something on virtual meetings. But you're right, it's not specific, clear in there, and it should be.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Councillor Tidridge.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Nick. I'm really glad that you've included a number of things in the Constitution review, which we've highlighted as being issues over the last couple of years, particularly petitions. I'm really glad to see that petitions and considering petitions properly is there. One of the things I would like to see is within the communications plan, the branding plan. One of the things that I found as initially as a member of the public starting to get more involved with or taking more of an interest in the council, and subsequently as a councillor, is just trying to understand how things work, understand how meetings work, where are the standing orders for the meetings, where are the rules for the meetings. So I'd really like to see the communications plan. It's not just a question of getting the right logo on stuff, it's a question of making sure that a member of the public can easily access and easily explore the constitution, standing orders, the way that meetings are constructed, etc. And possibly even more so now we're in this world where with virtual meetings where you can't arrive a bit early at the meeting and have 5 minutes with democratic services, for example. So there's a whole host of stuff around that, which becomes even more important that we get the communication piece right. So it's not just a question of getting the right logos and stuff, it's more fundamental than that. It's because that's what drives transparency, and that's at the end of the day what will make your job easier, Nick, in terms of actually using the thing. I
couldn't agree more. Actually, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of one of the reasons why we really need a review of this, because I could say that if you weave your way in and out of the Constitution, the rules are there. But I have to say, and I could read some paragraphs out to you from the Constitution. I read them and I have no idea what they mean. Yeah. And I just think, well, if I don't understand what they mean in the context of running a local authority, I'm absolutely certain that a member of the public wouldn't understand it. They are there exactly as you say to aid transparency, and there's nothing that frustrates me more than people who are saying, I don't understand what the council is doing, because they just don't understand the rules that we're operating on. So I think you know, you've said it yourself. I think that's exactly the reason we need this review at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grajewski.
Thank you, Chairman. Are we still on questions, or have we gone into debate?
I suppose they're questions, but
okay, fine. I'll try and stick to questions then. Just a point on page 14, right at the bottom in the box, it says ensuring compliance with DCLG, open and accountable local government. I guess that should be MHCLG now. Yes, I can see Mr. Tostian nodding.
Yeah. Although it might change its name again, of course, by the time we've written the Constitution.
Oh, you're so cynical. Right, okay. Moving down to page, it's sorry, my bubble's in the way, 2.73. It says it's going to depend on staff resources being available. Will it be properly resourced? Because further down at 3.3, it states that there is no formally allocated budget. And I wonder if our already overworked staff have got the time. And then at 4.2, it almost contradicts that, because in the role profiles, there's a responsibility to someone there to ensure that they commit project resources. So that's one question. You know, I mean, you know, how is it going to be funded, and how is time going to be allocated? That's one question. Secondly, it talks about branding at 5.3. Yeah, I work in branding as one of my other jobs, and I wonder how much that is going to cost. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down my bubbles here. I'm sorry, it's not as easy as having paper, is it? So that's the branding. You know, down there it says no. Oh yes, here. Councillor Tyson Payne mentioned aspirational elements, and it said the scope may need to be adjusted, and aspirational elements may need to be pushed into tranche 2 after November. And I'd just like to know which those aspirational elements are. And I'll leave the questions there for now. Thank you. Okay.
I have to say, I am not going to promise that the project will be able to be totally resourced adequately. I mean, I'm not going to gaze into the crystal ball and say that another lockdown, for example, which required staff to be pulled off to run the recovery groups and like might take priority. At the moment, what you've seen within the project structure is a very comprehensive list of staff. All those staff have time allocated to this particular project, so they are, in terms of human resources, they are budgeted for within our internal costs within the organisation. So I'm confident at the moment, as project sponsor, that I have sufficient resources to be able to run the project. But if something else changed within particularly something like another COVID outbreak, clearly other things may take priority, and then this would go onto the back burner. So. But we're sitting comfortably at the moment with the resources that we have. I think the branding issue is interesting, and again, it'd be interesting to see how deep that goes, because we do have a problem with branding. We're not very consistent on it. We're not very consistent in how we portray things. Things, for example, like some of our housing programs, where we've looked at branding that in terms of making it very, very clear. Again, that might be one of those aspirational issues that goes on beyond this. And I think there's a recognition when we talk about aspirational, it's really saying there may be issues that we work on through this, things such as the branding issue, things such as we've just discussed, even roles of committees and like, which become an aspiration for the future, because this may uncover all sorts of things that we'll want to take on in the future. But at this specific time, I don't have any clear ideas what they might be.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. And then Councillor Tyson Payne, you had another question, I believe.
Yes, I missed a question, and actually I think Councillor Grajewski may have actually covered it. It's about the virtual meetings. When I read this, I picked up that there was an assumption that virtual meetings will definitely be how we conduct council meetings going forward, and that would worry me. Much as there are some benefits, there are also some negatives to virtual meetings, and I would be concerned if the virtual meetings became the de facto go-to. So my question is it your intention that virtual meetings will be the future for the council? And whilst I've got the mic, I absolutely agreed with the comments of Councillor Tidridge about transparency, and that's why that benefit statement needs to be really hiked up. A PID should have strong benefit statements, and it truly doesn't. Back to you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think the issue of virtual meetings, I'd have to say, I'll throw that back at you as councillors, because I mean, virtual meetings have become the normal at the moment, but it's certainly not our intention as officers to continue with that. That will be very much a discussion with yourselves. We need provision within the Constitution to handle virtual meetings as we need to handle the normal sort of face-to-face meetings. The extent to which we move towards virtual meetings, partial virtual meetings, what meetings are virtual, is really an issue I think that we'll talk about to you as councillors, and maybe again one of the more aspirational things that we'll want to do after this constitution is there. What I want this constitution to do is make provision for the normal sorts of meetings that we have and the meetings that we've been used to, but also recognise that there are different types of meetings that we have, and therefore they need to be covered in this as well. But what I wouldn't be doing in this constitution, it wouldn't be right for the constitution to dictate at this point whether the meetings are virtual or otherwise. That's really for a discussion with councillors further down the line.
Thank you. And Councillor Tidridge, I believe you had another question.
Yes, which is definitely a question. Apparently, Councillor Parker-Jones was supposed to have been invited to the Constitutional Review member group. That doesn't seem to have happened.
I'll find out what's happened about that councillor. Because the group we have set up is, as you say, certainly Councillor Parker-Jones should be there. I'll find out why she's not been invited.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Were there any more questions from anyone? Otherwise, I have noted some possible recommendations, which I will read out, and then we can have a general discussion. Judith noted, and then we carry on. So, Judith, was that a question that you had?
No, I just typed it in and ready. That's all right. I'd like to speak again.
Yes, prepared. Be prepared. Excellent. So the recommendations I scribbled down are one, that the review have regard to how changes might support the aspirations of policy and performance. Obviously, we've got now our own 2021 action plan that distilled some of our hopes for the committee, and there may be opportunities around things like greater notice on reports that the Constitution can support. So I'd like to see that just picked up and reflected. Two, Councillor Grievski's suggestion around resourcing, just to make sure that this activity is properly resourced. Recommendation 3, to include some recognition of how the nature of work and meetings might have changed in future, but recognising also the limits of online meetings and the wishes of members. Number 4, to strengthen that benefits statement in the PID so that we're clear on the objectives of this review. Were there any more suggested recommendations or debate on those ones? Let's go to Judith, since you'd asked to speak.
Thank you. This is going to sound really sad, but you know, I love the Constitution, and not a week goes, well, not a fortnight goes by, I shouldn't think, that I don't dip into it for some reason or another. I even like the language, and I don't say it should be there in tablets of stone, because obviously it has to change, and it has changed. We regularly at full council get changes to the Constitution, and although I'm pleased to hear that any changes being brought forward will actually be tracked, because that used to be really quite tricky, trying to see what was there before. But I do have a hard copy which I can actually see from where I'm sitting at the moment. So anyway, I just hope that what the finished document is as much fun as the Constitution is at the moment. I'm pleased to hear that. I love it. I'm pleased to hear that we're not going to be seeing any changes to committees and so forth, because I know, Chairman, that you have been looking to strengthen scrutiny in the council, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. You know, I can remember when we had 4 scrutiny panels, and it's interesting looking at what these scrutiny panels do. It talks about overviewing and scrutinising decisions made by the Cabinet and local area committees. I've never seen anything from a local area committee come to scrutiny, and maybe it should. We used to have a resources scrutiny panel, an environment scrutiny panel which looked at street scene, waste, services and transportation, community and wellbeing scrutiny panel looked at benefits and housing, community engagement and community safety and so on. So I feel that scrutiny has been watered down enough at Eastleigh, and I'm pleased to say that at least the committees are going to get a stay of execution until the next AGM, Mr. Tustian, is that right? So that's good. But anyway, that was one of my concerns when I was looking at the papers earlier.
Was that a question, Councillor Garewski, or was that a debate?
This is debate.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I thought it was a question to me. Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, if you'd like to chip in, then please.
No, I thought you were asking me a question.
Please do. No. Well, I think you sort of answered it before when you said that there wouldn't be introducing any changes to roles of committees mid-year, but possibly at the AGM next year. In terms of virtual meetings, I mean, I hate them. I mean, I think they're great for one-to-ones. Particularly with my county council hat on, I'd be going up maybe having 5 one-to-ones with somebody in a day, and to be able to do those online is great. But at full council and larger committees, it's really unwieldy. I don't think it's good for democracy. I can't online jump up and say point of order, Mr. Mayor, because I have to go and type in request to speak, but by then everybody's voted. And I think also as human beings we communicate non-verbally. It's not just about what we say, and so I think that as soon as it's possible and safe, we need to get back to having some meetings. Let's not lose the good things about where we sort of come together, but use the technology that we've got now for those one-to-ones. That quick chat I had with the planning consultant this afternoon, it's great. I didn't have to go down to Eastleigh House, or even keep phoning. I could see when they were available on Teams, and that was fantastic. So, but going back to the Constitution, as I say, I like it, and I hope it's going to be as much fun and useful as it's been up until now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to agree with some of those points. I find chairing this committee is a little more exhausting online, and you're right, we miss out on a lot, I think, not being in place, whereas actually for internal boards like the IT board and the data security board, which are held during the day, being able to dip in digitally has worked quite well, and I think makes better use of people's time. So absolutely agree on those points. Jin, Councillor Tidridge, I think you wanted to come in with another point.
Yes, there doesn't seem to be a statement at the end of this about the climate emergency, which there probably should be. And I know it seems like an area which maybe is a little bit strange with the Constitution, but particularly talking about things like meetings, virtual meetings, etc., that involves a lot of setup, involves a lot of transport, involves a lot of resources. So that so there probably should be a statement like that in there. Also, going back to the thing about virtual, I think there's a balance to be struck. I think it's not all been negative. Switching to virtual meetings, I've got to say I quite like not having to traipse down to Eastleigh. That's quite good, and I think there's also potentially an argument that perhaps some members of the public might find it easier to participate if they don't have to travel to a location. Some people find it quite daunting going into a big hall with lots of people, and yet I think finding some way that we can still engage people, if we do get to the point where we can actually have physical meetings again, would be good. Going back to the point that was made earlier about televising meetings, making sure that people can engage and see what the council is doing as clearly as possible is incredibly important. So I think it's just a question of making sure that I don't think virtual is the answer to everything. I don't think physical is the answer to everything, but and going forward we'll be in this kind of hybrid blend of both factors, and there are positives of both, there are negatives of both, and I guess the big objective is to come up with something that delivers the best without pulling traps the worst.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you. Now I've got Councillor Tyson Payne down to speak, but Councillor Grajewski says that she has one more short point, so let's bring that one in now before we go.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, I turned my page and thought, oh dear, I forgot that. Earlier this week, I was on a webinar it's on test and trace actually, talking to councils up north where they've got a lot of issues with COVID, and one of the things that struck me was that they produce a lot of their information in several languages. And I know that we don't have as diverse a population here, and we have a smaller BAME community, but I do think it's important, in the interests of equality and diversity, that everybody has access to the information. And a lot of the information, I know you say you're making it easier for the general public to read, it still is quite likely to be complicated for some people, and I think it is important that people for whom English is a second language are also able to access the information in their own language if necessary. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Let's now go to Councillor Tyson Payne.
So as this is debate, I also want to throw out that the problem with virtual meetings is actually we exclude those who are digitally not online. So there is, and what I'm saying actually is I'm supporting there needs to be a balance. It needs not all to be one way. And I just felt it's important to make that point. And that's me shutting up.
Thank you. And then Councillor Broadhurst, I think you wanted to join in.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Particularly, it was this point about virtual meetings and actual meetings. I'm probably at the 75 plus age group. I'm probably the oldest one here tonight. Now, I've actually got to quite like the virtual meetings, and I think that we must remember, when considering it, the benefits to the environment of people not travelling lots of miles. I think there's someone here with us tonight, probably one of our officers from was it Chippenham, Carl, somewhere up that way. Sorry, I've just forgotten. Or Devizes, sorry, yeah. Well, these people have got to travel to and from meetings. Members have to travel, from Hamble to wherever. Or I think that we should, when looking at it, we've got to put the environment as fairly high on our priority, because if we don't get that right, we won't have a future for all of us. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Nick, I don't know if you wanted to come back on any of the points that have been raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's only a couple of issues. I must admit, I'm scratching my head a little bit on this climate change bit, about how to embody that within the Constitution. Perhaps, Councillor Tidgers, I can have an offline conversation with you to talk about what you mean. It's clearly we've got to make sure climate change influences all that we do, but in terms of a set of rules and how we operate, other than saying, well, yes, we need to try and be cognizant of the environment and do it in the most effective way. Other than that, I'm not sure how we embody something like a rule relating to climate change within the Constitution. So I wouldn't mind a discussion offline on that. I think Councillor Gresham makes a very good point about accessibility. We do have a section on accessibility at the moment in it, but we need to broaden that. I think we recognise that at the moment it is a bit limited in terms of in terms of the language as we put it in and the way we portray this. So absolutely agree with that, and that needs to be a crucial part of it. But I think it's actually been a really interesting discussion. I think it's quite clear. I think I need to tighten up on this PID, and I think maybe, and I'll be very honest, I think we've taken this very much as a bit of an internal exercise, that we are something that we've done time and time again. This is a more fundamental review. I am a little bit worried when I hear Councillor Atkinson say she's excited about the contract standing orders, and Councillor Gresky says she finds the Constitution fun. Clearly, we haven't done enough in terms of member training to help you get rid of those aspects of this. But I will actually take a fundamental look at this, because you've raised some interesting points that I don't think I'd thought of in terms of the breadth of the Constitution. One of the questions I was going to ask you as a panel, and I say I very much welcome the scrutiny. Once I've done this, what would you like me to do with it, in terms of, clearly, because we have a process that is going on, do you want me to report back at a future policy performance committee? Do you just hope to see the outcome of this embodied in all that we in the final documents, or what?
That's a good question. From my perspective as chair, our sort of overarching aspiration is to be involved often, and I suppose little, so not doing huge sessions in great detail all at the end of processes, but to touch in as things go along. So I would welcome staying in touch with that, seeing where our recommendations go in particular, and then seeing what comes out of that, and having the opportunity to do the pre-decision scrutiny that we might want to do. Of course, we usually make recommendations to Cabinet. In theory, legally, we can make recommendations to full council as well, and actually this venue may be a place where we could take a look over what's come out, have a more in-depth discussion than is possible at a meeting of full council. So maybe we could consider doing that. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, can I just add, we do have this members' constitution working by that. It is not beyond the realms of possibility if members, if they will agree to have you as part of that group, councillor, and actually represent the policy and performance scrutiny panel. If you feel that would help in terms of, and I always like to have a member representative being able to feed back to members on what they've seen and heard, because I think you get a much better view, a member view as to whether you're happy with what's happening. So would you be content with that if I push that forward? I'd be happy to do that. Judith, you've put yes in chat. Was that yes? You'd be happy with that, or yes, you'd like to speak?
Yeah. Yes, I agree with what you said. Yes, we need to see it again. We need to be able to make recommendations if we feel there are recommendations to be made, and a little and often. Thank you.
Thank you. But yes, certainly I'd be happy to be involved in that work, and then yes, we can bring it back to this committee when it's a bit fleshed out, or as you have questions that you want to raise. We're here to be useful. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. So unless anyone has any debate, and do shout in chat, I move that we make the following recommendations, and I'll speak reasonably slowly so that whoever's minuting has a chance. One, that we strengthen the benefits statement in the PID so that we are clear of the value of this exercise. Number two, that we ensure the exercise is properly resourced. Number three, that we have regard to how any changes in ways of working embodied in the Constitution can support the aspirations of policy and performance as described in our 2021 action plan. Number four, that we give regard to how the nature of work and meetings has changed, that we recognise the limits and opportunities of online meetings. Number five, that in any changes to the way we work, we consider the implications on the climate change emergency. And then number six, that we consider how to make the Constitution more accessible to residents of various backgrounds. I proposed them. Can I have a seconder for those recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Tyson-Payne. And could we now have a vote? The vote is showing up in chat.
I think we were at 100%, Chair.
Thank you. That is, those recommendations are carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody.
No, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Yes,
panel.
thank you, Nick, for attending and talking us through that. And we look forward to seeing how it goes.
Thank you.
Item 8 is our tree strategic planning document. This is us engaging early in some policy. So do we have Councillor Carl? We do, in which case I'm going to ask our strategic planning lead for the environment, Jason Light, and we'll welcome Councillor Rupert Curl, who's Cabinet Member for the Environment, to please introduce and just talk us through this tree SPD and how we can be useful. Rupert.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and members of the Policy and Resources Scrutiny Panel. Very much appreciate the opportunity to come before you again this evening to present two other very important elements, key pieces of the jigsaw indeed for the climate and environment emergency strategy and action plan, which obviously no doubt members are very much aware of. I think you might recall that at the last meeting we brought forward the tree nursery item, and I do recall that actually there were some very sort of interesting and active comments and dialogue and debate, if you like, about actually trees in general, I think, actually, to be honest with you, which obviously sort of prompted, you know, again, to bring these items forward before you. As you'll see from the briefing note, obviously it does set out quite a long list, in effect, of elements within both of those, because obviously it does cover a huge amount of ideas and things, obviously, that we want to bring forward, and elements which are obviously very key to both of those things. It's very difficult also, in effect, when people start talking about trees, because tree strategy and sort of planning are sort of intrinsically linked, really, to be honest, which is why, in effect, we thought it was a good idea to bring both before you this evening, because it's very difficult to sort of stay on one track and talk about one thing, which obviously does also lead into other elements, and quite rightly, I understand that's the reason why. I mean, very plainly, I think Jason has actually got some slides which obviously he'll want to go through with you, so I won't want to take anything away from what he wants to say, because obviously there are some real key elements to this. But basically, the tree strategy is really understanding sort of where the council is, where we are, where we want to go, and basically, in effect, how we're going to achieve that and what we need to do that. And the supplementary planning document is clearly, obviously, something that is going to sit within the local plan when it's adopted, which will obviously set out what it is that the council expects developers to do with regards to trees, you know, with regards to placemaking or master planning, and also, in effect, mitigation strategies for any trees that may obviously have to be lost within that process. But clearly, obviously, it will be a document that will set out exactly what it is that the council will require from developers when they are looking to bring forward planning applications. So, in effect, it's setting out our stall about what we expect from them. Obviously, you've seen in the briefing note there's a lot more to that than what I've obviously just outlined here, and as I say, Jason has got some slides which he will want to go through with you in a minute, which obviously puts a bit more flesh on that. And just lastly, before I hand over to Jason, I just was wondering, Chair, obviously, as you've just quite rightly pointed out, sort of at the beginning of this process, if you like, whether or not you might feel that possibly a task and finish, a timed task and finish group maybe could be put forward or put together that might be able to look at the elements within both of these key pieces of work to bring forward any recommendations or ideas, if you like, that obviously can be incorporated into the policy and strategy as it's then finalised and taken through for adoption. I think it would be really important to get your input into this, and I know that there are members on this panel, hopefully all of them, but certainly there are some who are very passionate about trees, and so am I, and I want to make sure that actually we do absolutely have the right strategy and the right policy that's fit for purpose and delivers exactly the aims and objectives that we want to see into the future. We very much value the input that policy and performance have to this process, and obviously we want to continually engage with you all to make sure that we absolutely do the best that we can. So I don't know whether we can take that as a front runner in effect as a recommendation, Chair, but clearly obviously that's down to yourself and members to decide, possibly at the end, I suppose. Obviously happy to take questions from you, and obviously Jason, I think also Paul Naylor, I think I did see his picture somewhere. I think he might be in attendance as well. So if I can't answer the questions, obviously Jason and Paul, I'm sure we'll be able to do so. But that's all from me at the moment, Chair, and obviously I'll be happy to come back at some point later on, obviously, if you wish me to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rupert. I'm surprised and pleased to hear a cabinet member suggesting a scrutiny task and finish group. I hope you haven't gone native with all your attendances here, Rupert, but your engagement with us is noted and very welcome. So yes, I think a task and finish group makes a lot of sense, and it might make sense to, if you like, reconvene the environment group that we had, which I believe was chaired by Tim Groves. Councillor Groves, would you be happy to chair a task and finish to pick up some of these issues and engage on these policies as they develop?
Yes, Chair, I'd be happy to do that, and be very pleased to reconvene the environment task and finish group. I think that's a good way forward.
Brilliant, thank you. Which brings us to Jason. Did you want to add anything to what Rupert had said?
Thanks, Chair. Is that specifically on the task and finish group, or?
No, just on the general direction.
But shall I go through some slides and go in a bit more detail?
Please. Yes, yeah. Please. Here we go.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the introduction, Rupert. I'll just quickly go through a few things. As kind of mentioned already, this is kind of early stages for the development of both the supplementary planning document and the more broader strategy around trees. We were quite keen that there's quite a need for the development in SPD, and there's a lot of wider kind of initiatives and challenges and the ambition really set out by the council, which quite often when we talk about the SPD we end up talking about things that are beyond planning. So we decided to sort of co-produce the two things together, and hopefully there's a bit of logic in that, because it will mean that you can see these things as they're being developed. So just briefly, where I'll go through today, I'll just show some areas that have been identified already for inclusion in the broader tree strategy. I'll run through some of the kind of early details, some of the activities we're going through right now in developing a supplementary planning policy around trees, and set out some of the timescale that we're looking at. Obviously, we've had some discussion around a task and finish group, so we try and fit that into the process, but we're quite keen to progress this quite quickly. So just on to the strategy, I think you can probably take from Rupert's comments at the beginning, we're talking about sort of creating a legacy really of trees, and there's quite a commitment to plant for future generations. Placemaking, there's issues around disease that we need to kind of deal with, such as ash dieback, but also we've had mentioned several times this evening around the climate emergency, and there's various elements to that regarding resilience of trees, shading, and dealing with things such as urban heat island effect, and looking at trees in urban areas as well as more rural parts of the borough. So at this kind of early stage, it's quite obvious we need to look at what we're doing with the existing tree stock, and understanding what that picture is. The management of trees, both on borough council land and beyond in the borough. The protecting side of things and enhancing through development. I'll go into a bit more detail around what we're looking at for the supplementary planning document in a moment. And then there's already been commitments by the council around expansion of trees, and obviously in February there was the decision at full council which included planting 160,000 additional trees by the end of this decade, but also looking at planting those through the creation of the tree nursery, which went through cabinet a couple months ago. So we're looking at some quite kind of innovative approaches there to deliver this. But there's linkages to other strategies as well, and I'll touch upon those later. So on the management of trees, we have a new tree management system which is being rolled out at the moment. There's been quite a lot of work over the last couple of years looking at maintenance schedules and looking at existing trees. But there's things such as reviewing and auditing the stock and the borough, dealing with matters such as health and safety, which is the kind of ongoing process. But even things such as asset transfer and you know, sometimes there's land sales that might include trees and how we deal with those, and there's quite a lot of work goes into that as that happens as we go along, but it could be something we include within the strategy. And then tree preservation orders and including enforcement as part of that and how we deal with that, and we can set these things out where possible in the strategy to show how we intend to do that. And with TPOs, that could be possibly a proactive approach around tree area orders as well. I mentioned the expansion of trees. Obviously, we've had that commitment, and the route we're taking with Salisbury trees. There's also quite an important element to that, which is how we work with other agencies, residents, community groups, businesses, and key organisations such as parish councils and other local authority partners. We already do this to some extent, but we've had some quite active discussions over the last few months around trees, both with the county council, but also with partners such as the Woodland Trust. I've had several meetings with them talking about what they see as best practice, and I've had discussions with the Forestry Commission and other partners as well. So we're looking at that and how we can connect up with that. But as I mentioned, those broader kind of strategies. So biodiversity is obviously a key element to this. I've mentioned carbon sequestration. There's various environmental reasons around trees. That's quite an apt one today. I think the publication of the UK Citizens Assembly report came out this morning, and there was a 99% support from the Citizens Assembly for dealing with the climate emergency by planting more trees. So it's very timely to discuss it this evening. I should say the 1% they didn't support wasn't sure, so wasn't they didn't support. But also health and well-being, air quality, mental health. You could go on all night for the benefits around planting trees, and we can set those out. And even waste management. We in the cabinet report around the tree nursery, we talk a bit around dealing with matters such as plastic consumption and other kind of elements that. So maintaining that within the tree approach. So more specifically on the supplementary planning document, there's kind of three elements that we've started. So we've started to piece together this document. There'll also be an introduction section to that. There's a section that sets out in a bit more detail the benefit of trees. So it can be used as part of that planning process. And then the kind of main sort of aspect of this is setting the guidance and the support for applicants. And that's the area where we need to be very, very kind of specific, but also where we can try where possible to be as ambitious as possible. So as I mentioned, we're starting to put this together. So there's some work going on at the moment, development management around the specification. Our ecology and landscape teams and other internal stakeholders are looking quite specifically about the detail in the guidance that we can put through. Our planning policy team have instigated the process of doing a scoping assessment. As Rupert mentioned, there's certain processes we need to go through, which mean that there's weight behind this policy. There was efforts made within the local plan to ensure we can have policies such as this hang off the plan and have weight. So we've got formal processes we need to go through, and one of those I'll mention in a moment is around consultation, but also that engagement with key stakeholders, and Natural England, Forestry Commission, Woodland Trust, the local wildlife trust. There's quite a number of organisations who have a very key view on this, and they've got good understanding of best practice as well. So we've been talking to those already as part of this process. But then looking at some of the kind of specific things. So do we want to include a standard in there around what the quality of the trees are? And one example of that's the Woodland Trust locally sourced standard. Species preferences comes up quite early when you talk to people about trees, and what type of trees we would expect in what area, and that comes into that technical guidance, and something that comes up quite a bit around maintenance and having those specifications in there within the planning processes, and then also sort of extra clarification around proximity to woodland, and that could be ancient and other woodland as well, which comes through. So one thing that comes up quite early, and Rupert mentioned, there's the strategy and the policies is likely to focus on retention of trees, but unfortunately there will be instances where trees will have to be removed. So looking at options for this, and there's several have been kind of put forward in the early side of things, and this is something we can talk to the Environment Task and Finish group if it's formed, I guess, I want to assume. But the one option's around ratio, and that's quite a common one, and I'll show an example in a moment. Also looking at potentially the kind of canopy and looking at the kind of net gain on that, and whether we could set a local target or perhaps a development specific target, how we would go about that and measuring that. And there's more detailed ones which are around leaf area index, which is a very technical way of looking at it. But it may be that we end up looking across several of these, or may focus on one. So just to give an example of what the Bristol have a really good example of how you might replace individual trees. So based on the diameter of the tree, you would then have to replace a certain number. So if it's 80 plus, it's 8 trees for replacement of that, and their report goes into more detail about what those 8 trees would look like, and what species they are, and what size they are, and what age they are, and how they've been managed. So all of that kind of detail. But this is just one of many examples, and we might discuss this with the group and decide that it should be 20 rather than 8, or we might decide it needs to be 4. It's kind of, that's all open for review over the coming months. So next steps, obviously we've got the meeting today, which is sort of early engagement with P&P. We're looking at coming back in December to P&P with a more comprehensive thing, so we can come back with a draft strategy and a draft SPD for review. In between time, we need to do some public consultation on certainly on the SPD. So we're looking at a 6-week consultation starting mid-October, which should come in around a week before P&P, which gives us time to kind of work through that, which will then mean that we're able to kind of meet those important statutory planning obligations for putting through an SPD. We're then looking at potentially, if everything goes through okay, a kind of 10th of January sign off with Cabinet. So that's the kind of process. It's quite a a short timeline, but there's some real commitment to kind of get this through as quick as possible.
Thank you very much, Jason. That's really interesting. I'm pleased to see that going forward, because as you say, this really does link in with so many other things that are going on with the climate change and biodiversity strategy, with the tree nursery that of course has been approved, and with all of those aspirations. So we can have some questions and debate, and I suggest we just mix it all up. I'm cognizant that if we want to form a task and finish, that is going to provide a venue for the really detailed questions and policy development. So I'd like to keep this discussion on sort of burning questions, broad scoping issues for that task and finish group, or possibly debate about whether you want a task and finish group if you disagree. And then we can send that group off with a clear ask to help get that policy and SPD ready to come back in December. So Councillor Tidridge, I think you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you. A question really for Jason. I was interested to see clarification of development proximity of woodland. Very pleased to see that in there. I'm very pleased as well that you're talking to the Woodland Trust, because of course there's that 90-metre gap between two of their sites of ancient natural woodland, which this council wanted to put a big major road through, which they weren't overly impressed by. So I'm very glad to see that you've got that in there, and I really do hope that that discussion will include fragmentation as well as actual distance, because obviously fragmentation of habitats can have a significant impact on them. That's one of the reasons why so many local people were so up in arms against that proposal for the road. I'd also be interested to know what discussions have been taking place, and again, possibly more for the Task and Finish group, in terms of discussions with the Woodland Trust, but also Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, etc., about woodland creation. Where we're looking to create woodlands, what are we doing to enhance the woodlands that we've got? I think that's a really valuable question. It's great to see we're planting trees, but it's also fantastic to try and make sure that we're doing so in such a way that really maximises the biodiversity and ecological impact of planting those trees, and doing so in an intelligent way. One thing I couldn't see from the documents, and it might just be that I'm not close enough to it, or I didn't spot it. I'm always very disappointed when I see developers planting trees which then die. It gets to be quite depressing, doesn't it? You go around a development a year or so after it's finished and you can count the dead trees. So making sure that we have a good maintenance approach that planning enforcement can use with a lot of teeth to ensure that trees aren't just planted in order to die, they're planted in order to thrive and contribute towards the area. And I'd be quite keen to be involved with the Task and Finish group, if at all possible, please.
Great, thank you. Jason, did you want to come back on any of those points quickly, or Rupert?
Yeah.
Super.
Thank you, Chair. So just to kind of, I'll work through them backwards, I suppose, but so certainly enforcement and maintenance of the planning policies is quite key. That's something that we're looking to include in the SPD. There's several ideas around this, around even the council's own street scene service, and their involvement maybe in maintenance, which we see on other certain development sites, might be one approach to make sure that there are watering schedules and things that are being adhered to. But it's definitely an important element to that we have close monitoring and control of those trees when they go in, so they don't just go in and get removed straight away, and then that commitment's there that we were expecting. Woodland creation, that's definitely something our ecologists are looking and they've had discussions with the Wildlife Trust about this already, and looking at how we can improve connections between different sites, and looking at locations. So we're definitely looking at that, and that will hopefully form part of the strategy for how we deliver the 160,000 trees, and certainly looking at various different habitats, because obviously trees isn't the only habitat that we need in forests and things. So all of that will be taken in that context, because it's quite important that we support biodiversity and not monoculture, just single trees that you might have in certain areas of the region. So definitely look at all of those things.
Can I just come back, Chair, if I may, just quickly? Sure. Just wanted to add to Jason's point. I absolutely agree about the enforcement side of things with planning with regards to landscaping agreements, which clearly are in the planning applications or within conditions within planning applications that anything dies within 5 years, etc., will be replaced. However, what we want to make sure, and actually I think sort of stress to developers, is that we don't want to get to that point in the first place. What we want to do is make sure we're planting trees and creating environments that are going to thrive, as you quite rightly pointed out. I don't think it's reasonable, and I don't think it's fair that you put trees in which have clearly had a bit of had a journey already to get to the point where they get planted out anyway, to then find that actually they're stuck in the ground, which actually is not really probably appropriate either, because it hasn't been sort of maybe put together properly or whatever, if you like, isn't appropriate, if you like, for the tree to go in, and then it's not watered either. And I know there's a development very close to me in my ward, in effect, actually, where this is exactly the case. And I have to say there have been not only residents but also parish councillors, including myself, who've actually been quite upset, actually, because you walk around the site and all you see are these dead sticks that are standing up, which offer no biodiversity whatsoever for anything at all, no value at all to anything. And then you're then told we're going to have to wait a year for the next planting season for them to be replaced, and you're then worried that they're then not going to get watered again. So enforcement, planning enforcement, all that kind of stuff is an absolute key part to this, but also making sure that actually we do stress to developers that, when you say you're going to plant X amount of trees, etc., that actually you do have a maintenance regime, and that you then are monitored to make sure you're adhering to that, but also that you actually stick to it, because it's incredibly important for the residents of those developments that are then going to be living there, and also, as I say, for the wildlife, because we do need to live in harmony with our environment and with our wildlife. So absolutely take on board the points that you've raised. So yes, we will be taking those into account, definitely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Jen, did you want to add anything?
Nope, that'll do for now. Plenty more to say, but if I can move on with the task and finish group, that'll scoop it up nicely.
Yeah, brilliant. Councillor Broadhurst, I think you wanted to come in.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly on the case of trees on new developments, just picking up on what Rupert was saying, totally agree. And the problem there is often they stick the things in. It isn't the soil that's wrong. They don't actually water them, because new trees need to be watered probably for about a year, and no one bothers to cost that in. And whether that's something we can put in our planning conditions in future, rather than just saying how many trees should be planted, but you've got to maintain them for a year, 2 years, would be a good idea. But the other thing I just want to pick up on, and I'm sure that Paul Naylor will know and will probably already guess what I want to pick up on. And that is with trees, particularly on public land. I mean, on our land, I'm particularly worried about on borough council land. What I don't see in the strategy is anything about the ongoing maintenance and inspection of those trees, because trees, years ago we set up procedures to actually inspect regularly all trees that were on borough council land, and you have to take into consideration the location. Obviously, if the tree is somewhere near where the public are going underneath it all the time, and a branch comes off and kills someone, well, that's a serious problem, and the trees then have to be inspected very regularly. If you've got one in the middle of a wood and it comes down, well, the probability is that the rest of the trees will just hold it up and there isn't any public access. But it does worry me that if we're going to go plant all these new trees, I want to see something about inspection and maintenance. I can remember one, I think it was in Holland Close, came down in the early 2000s because it was planted on the bank of a stream. The stream had got in flood, washed all the soil away, and it was quite a big tree, and I think it actually did a fair amount of damage to private property when it came down. Well, this is bad for the council. It doesn't do our reputation any good. and you also get things where, you know, if a tree was to come down, a branch was to come down and kill someone, I don't want to see a future sort of cabinet member for the environment or chief executive being held up on corporate manslaughter charges. So I think it is important, and that could happen, that we do put into our policy something to ensure that the trees are not just planted and left, but they are regularly checked and made so that anything dangerous is spotted. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think that's a good point. And Paul Naylor has offered to respond to that very good point. Here we go.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a very good point which Councillor Broadhurst raises. And Jason has alluded to it in his presentation. One of the things that we're looking to do, or we've actually implemented, is we've brought in a new tree management system, which will mean any tree which is planted in the future will be logged on that system, and it will be linked to a GIS map as well, so that we'll be able to actually regularly maintain it, and it'll be scheduled for maintenance and inspections to make sure that it's growing and being looked after properly. I think the important thing here is that as we, you know, the ambition is to plant 160,000 trees over the next 10 years. All of those trees will need proper maintenance and management in the future, in order to make sure that we are increasing the tree canopy across the borough. And that's one of the core pieces of information that we'll have within our tree management system moving forward. Hopefully that gives you some reassurance that we are actually managing this properly and taking a completely holistic view of the whole tree system. Canopy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Oh, I got some feedback. If you could all mute your microphones. Councillor Caldry, I think you wanted to speak.
Thank you. I wanted to put in my tuppence worth about something that Jason did allude to briefly, but the need for biodiversity means you've got to have not just trees, but you've got to have scrub, you've got to have wilding, and it's very important that we that we get wild places back into the borough. Obviously, that's not going to add to the tree canopy as such, but it's a different environment for different species and for different uses. And I haven't actually seen anything in the strategy. 160,000 trees is a great headline, but actually it's there for a strategy to increase the biodiversity. And it's much more difficult to get scrub in and keep scrub in, which is very good breeding ground for different types of species. And we need to include that in our strategy, and it's actually going to be a lot more difficult, and certainly you can't put every scrub down onto Paul's new system and maintain it, but it's going to be quite a difficult challenge to meet. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. A really good point.
Can I come back on that, Chair?
Really quickly.
Oh yeah, okay, very quickly then, Chair. Just to say that Councillor Caldry is absolutely right, and clearly is part of a patchwork of work which looks at biodiversity across the whole piece. In effect, is incredibly important. Trees are very important, but so are the other elements that go with them as well. And whether that's scrub or whether that's wildflowers, whatever that scenario might be, clearly they all have their part to play, because that's the whole point in effect of biodiversity, is that actually you're supporting the whole chain of environment, but also wildlife as well. So he's absolutely quite correct. One thing doesn't necessarily fit every scenario, but clearly across the piece there will be things and elements and opportunities that we'll be able to take forward. So we very much will be looking to do those with our ecologists, etc., as part of the biodiversity action plan, which obviously trees are a key element of. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupert. And then Councillor Asman, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the loss of trees, I think there's in quotes, a hidden loss here, because with new developments, then developers will make out a tree planting scheme, and some of those trees are planted on the land of the individual homeowners. Now, I know there's solicitor, and the tree planting obligations are carried through to the owners of the properties. They should be aware of them, but how many people actually listen to their solicitors and really want to know the finer detail of what is on the planning permission for their property? So there is a huge, it's quite a large amount of trees that die because homeowners are not interested in their boundary fencing boundaries, which actually comprise small trees to them, and really don't care, or they are of such a wrong nature that they die anyway. But I mean, that's a sort of hidden loss of quite a number of trees. I'm not sure what we can do about it, but I just, you know, just draw it to your attention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Janice. I think that's a really good point, that considering how we engage with sort of trees in private ownership as well as our own and through the planning process can be considered. And I think Rupert wanted to come back on that. Rupert.
Yes, I absolutely agree with Councillor Asman, and I won't go over what she's just said, apart from the fact that one of the things that we will probably all have seen when we get our emails each week about the planning applications is householder applications, and the amount of those which actually have tree works within them. And I think that that's absolutely really key that we do understand, and that's why I said at the beginning about understanding where we are with our tree stock, but also where we are with trees within the borough, and understanding that you're quite right, Councillor Asman, that there is a net loss over a period of time, and what we need to be making sure is that we're ahead of the curve of that loss, if you like. So we're taking account of what is the net loss across the borough, but also making sure that we are ahead of the curve by replacing those trees, but also making sure that householders, when trees are removed, that we are made aware of, that either enforcement action is taken, but also that they are then replaced as soon as practically possible to do so. So I think you're absolutely right. I certainly notice from the planning applications that come through each week that there are a significant amount of tree works that are applied for to be done. And what we need to make sure is that they are being accounted for, to make sure that we don't have over a period of time a significant net loss in our tree stock. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rupert. And Councillor Duguid says in chat that, related to Janice's point, some developers fold the company when development completes, leaving trees in no man's land. So yes, something for the task and finish that I'm about to propose to consider. So we can carry on debate after I move this if we want to, but I move that we establish a task and finish group to be chaired by Councillor Groves to do the following. 1, to assist with the development of the tree strategy and tree SPD, to consider congruence of that strategy, the SPD, the overall climate action plan and strategies such as enforcement, to consider KPIs for the strategy to feed into performance management, to engage stakeholders and take evidence from external bodies such as the Woodland Trust, and then to report to the committee alongside the pre-decision items on their deliberations and input. If anyone else would like to speak, please indicate so in chat, and if you would like to join that task and finish group, please also indicate that in chat. So I'm going to move that, and Councillor Atkinson, I believe you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just a little bit concerned regarding the enforcement issues regarding the trees. Certainly we do want enforcement. I'm just concerned that the council has sufficient resources to do that. Can that be taken into account when you look at the task and work group? Because it's really important that we do enforce. Otherwise, this is just not going to happen, particularly with private landowners. And we have to have the right team within enforcement to be able to do this. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Yes, we can certainly fold that in. So planning enforcement in general is something we have been keeping a bit of an eye on in policy and performance. So I don't envisage that we'll stop looking at that in general. But yes, certainly I think the task and finish can consider A, the policy around it, and B, resourcing if necessary. Any more debate or discussion, or could I have a seconder for my motion? Thank you, Councillor Tyson. Seconded. Any more debate? Otherwise, we'll have a vote, please. No, it looks like we can have a vote.
Apologies, the box comes right over my microphone, so I can't tell you that I am working on it, and we have to write it as we go.
Thank you.
So we were up to 11 councillors able to respond earlier. Is somebody not voted or not able to vote at the moment?
It's a mystery.
It's clearly carried, Chair, but I will just have a look behind the scenes to see who we're missing.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you. So that is carried, and I've got volunteers from Councillor Tidridge, Councillor Broadhurst, and I will volunteer for that task and finish as well. As ever, if anyone else wants to join that task and finish, do get in touch and we'll make sure that you're included. So that brings us to thank Councillor Curl and Jason for coming to talk us through that. We're looking forward to working on those policies. Thank you for engaging us early on that. And brings us on to item 9 on our agenda, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan. So, as ever on the Cabinet Forward Plan, and Councillor Curl, you're welcome to stay, but don't feel that you have to.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll leave if that's okay. But thank you all very much for your assistance this evening. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. And as ever, I take items 9 and 10 together because the real reason for considering the Cabinet Forward Plan is to see if we want to look at anything. So that's the Cabinet Forward Plan and the work programme. As I said earlier, I have got a meeting with Dickon to sit down and look at how the policy reviews that are coming up will fit into our work plan, so we can really flesh that out for the rest of the year. Was there anything on the Cabinet Forward Plan that anyone wanted us to pick up? I had a look and didn't see anything in particular. No one's shouted in chat. And was there anything anyone wanted to add to the work programme? Next month we've got penciled in the pollution strategy. We've currently got penciled in COVID recovery. I believe that will go to November, and we'll have a more detailed work plan by then to look through, plus possibly a housing allocation policy, but we'll see. But was there anything else anyone wanted to pick up? Oh, and thank you, Councillor Atkinson is leaving, but thank you for joining us this evening. Anyone want to speak? Otherwise, I just move that we note those 2 documents. And if everyone agrees with us to just note them, could you unmute and just say that you agree or something?
Agree.
Agreed.
Yes,
Agreed.
Thank you, everybody. So that concludes our meeting. Thank you to, oh, there's no one watching from home. There were at one point 1 or 2 people, so we'll thank them anyway. The next meeting will be held on the 15th of October at 6:45. So thank you all for coming, and have a pleasant month until we meet again.
Thank you.